What's up, peers, and welcome to the World Crypto Network. Here today, continuing with a new series on the Bitcoin Reading Group, where we read amazing stuff. And today we are going to do the first part of a series where we, over the next couple of weeks, will read "For a New Liberty: The Libertarian Manifesto" by the great Murray Rothbard. And you can get this book for free, of course, at the Mises Institute at Mises.org. Jumping in really quick with a reading of the first paragraph of part 1, the Libertarian Creed. The non-aggression axiom. The Libertarian Creed rests upon a central axiom, that no man or group of men may aggress against the person or property of anyone else. This may be called the non-aggression axiom. Aggression is defined as the initiation of the use or threat of physical violence against the person or property of anyone else. Aggression is therefore a synonymous with invasion. This is just the first paragraph here of this great book by Murray Rothbard. And we are going to read, or well, at least we're going to read this off air and then just discuss about what we've learned in all these chapters. So today with me, I'm of course not alone. We have Ben joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, Max. How you doing?
Oh, fantastic. We also have Zane. What's up, my friend?
Not much, just this.
Perfect. And Pedro joining us today. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Very nice. Okay, Zane, would you just lead us into the first chapter about the history of the Libertarian Creed?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think there's sort of a big lead-in section to this book before we get into the actual discussion of the non-aggression axiom, which sort of unpacks the history of the US in particular through the lens of like the libertarian take on things. And it's fascinating because, we exist in a time period where a lot of our definitions are being like quite substantially skewed by I guess, the hegemony of our time, to the point that our interpretation of the concepts of being, say, conservative or liberal have been abstracted from their actual meanings. And I think it's important to remember that the American Revolution was inherently a libertarian activation. It didn't have that name. That name, I think, is more recent and might have even been something that Rothbard popularized. I'm not entirely sure of that history. Max would know better. But basically, it was this classical liberal idea, which was incredibly suspicious of most forms of government because Ben, I see you come off mute. I feel like
I was going to jump in that saying, like, didn't we start, an intercontinental war over a 2% tax?
Yeah.
and we also were talking about the axioms of political thought, and like we're all default Keynesians too, right? So I feel like those kind of run right along there. But I didn't want to interrupt you too much. I just wanted to interject there.
Yeah, no, and so. I sort of found this kind of fascinating because the history of the US with the parties was that the Democratic Party sort of came out of what was initially like the Democratic Republican convention, which was like one sort of group. And the Democratic Party separated from that when they saw that it was skewing back towards the sort of aggressive statism that the US had tried to escape. And it sort of came out with this inherently libertarian viewpoint. But it had a fatal flaw. And that fatal flaw was that they were not consistent with the Libertarian Creed because up until a certain point, they believed in slavery. And this sort of created this faction within this new Democratic Party that basically blew up their long-term plan of putting the US back on course towards this more classical liberal way of acting in the world, where we had smaller government and the ideas were all based on just people coming together and working together without having these leaders and these rulers. And I find it fascinating because there's I think it's sort of easy to if you don't think deeply about it. Easy to criticize some Bitcoiners, I think, for being like really stubborn and like really sticking to their guns and being incredibly consistent and not really giving any flexibility on their beliefs. But I think there's a good precedent for being exactly like that. I think there's a good precedent for being really strict about the principles of these libertarian views, because we see evidence of this in that early Democratic Party, where slavery is obviously a massive violation of, in particular, the non-aggression axiom. And if you're not absolutely consistent with this, it can poke a massive hole in what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, very well points, as always saying. And right, the thing here is it's a axiom. It's a fundamental, groundbreaking truth that we know without the shadow of a doubt to be the case. And so it doesn't really matter how much you break it. As soon as you make that first step over the line, as soon as you are in denial of truth and act willingly against what you know to be truth, you are going to manifest chaos into reality, regardless of the specifics, right? So, Ben, as you said, the American heritage, right? They fought a war, a cross-continental war with a king and a dynasty as powerful as it was ever in that time, for 2% of theft of taxation, right? 2%. And now we look today, right? The frog in boiling water, all of a sudden having what, 95, 98% being stolen from us by several institutions, both via taxation and of course inflation. And we don't do jack shit, right? Though of course we have Bitcoin, the most peaceful revolution there ever was, right? And that is why we're so passionate about all this. But then again, right, it is a fundamental thing. It doesn't matter if there's 99% slavery or 50% slavery or 2% slavery. Slavery is bad. Killing people is bad. Stealing from them is bad. It doesn't matter. And regardless the justification.
Yeah, would you guys mind like trying to, after having read some of this, trying to give a quick summary of like what it means to be libertarian?
Well, I would say it is the Libertarian Creed. It's do not steal. Done. Like, that's it. That's the one rule. Don't take what is not yours. Don't take someone else's life. Don't murder him, right? Don't take someone else's free being or like physical well-being. Don't like break his leg, right? Don't assault him. Don't take someone's free will to sexual choice. Don't rape them, right? Don't walk into someone's house without him inviting you. Don't trespass. And of course, don't break your word, right? Don't sell something wrong in a contract, right? Do not break private contracts. Do not lie. And that is, and of course also that applies with do not threaten to do these things. So applying the coercion in the future based on some certain condition. If you do not follow my rules, I will put you in a cage, right? These are all immoral things, and they are 100% binary, always immoral. And the question is, who has started that? And the initiation of aggressive and active force, that is aggression, right? That is what is wrong. Because if we have the right and liberty of private property, then this means that we also have a right to defend it. So defensive violence or defensive force, I would say, is not aggression, but rather a act to put the universe back into its right place, right? To defend what is true and to speak it strongly.
Yeah, I kind of find this fascinating within a contemporary context, because I think people have an intuition for that freedom. And you talked initially about like, do not rape, do not like impose on people, their sexual identities and things like this. And I think this gets back to the history of how libertarianism became maligned by definitions and by the abuse of like knowledge differentials, because a lot of what's happening at the moment, where the social justice warriors are campaigning on a lot of these things, it's like, yeah, like I agree, like no shit, like obviously sex without consent is bad, like that is a very strong viewpoint and it's just intuitive. But it has somehow been abstracted into this political context where it's been coupled up with all this other baggage, and the religion of statism, and it's just inherently damaging. And I think that we can see a lot of how this emerged in earlier American history, and in particular how around like, when did the book talk about? I think like late 19th century, early 20th century, talking about how a lot of these classical liberal philosophies got tied up in a new statism, and got tied up in like the proletariat, and how there was this conscious effort through the information channels available to power holders to basically make people feel like they were victimized as a tool for requiring statism. I don't know if I'm making this clear, but basically, like, the workers before like the move of Marxism actually believed in the laissez-faire attitude. That was the pervasive attitude of the time. There was this inherent understanding that people were better to interact with each other in a free context. There was this intuitive knowledge that would create better opportunities for people, that it would lower costs for the things that they have, and create like a greater prosperity. And there was this conscious attack on knowledge that coupled this big sort of like nanny state with the idea that suddenly the workers were maligned. And I'm not saying that like working conditions were perfect or anything, but there was this way of twisting the way that they were experiencing the world in a fashion that created an outsized dependence and belief in the state. And I think we see the same thing here with a lot of things that we understand intuitively that have been coupled up with this belief that we need some big like lobby group to sort it out for us. That this is one of my favorite things that Marty Bent says all the time, which is that we're born on a rock flying through space. Like you gotta sort your shit out. And I guess like we understand this when we get on an airplane, because everyone gets told that they need to put their mask on first and then help the person next to them. It makes perfect sense. You're not going to help anyone if you're the one that's suffocated. But we've created this world where we sort of expect in this hypothetical example, that the air stewards would like all come down the aisle and put everyone's fucking masks on for them. It just doesn't make sense. Like, put your own mask on.
Yeah, I think what I thought of actually when you were talking there, just before that, you're talking about almost creating these situations where you're like, oh, see, you need someone, you need us to take care of this for you, right? And actually, listening to a lot of Milton Friedman lately, and he talks a lot about this in the 60s and 70s, where you have all these government organizations, all the acronyms he calls them, OFAC and OSHA, and all these organizations are supposed to protect the workers, but he finds that most of these organizations create situations where you need more organizations to help all the problems that they create. So it's like it's amazing how power encroaches, right? And when you open the door to government taking control of something, it seems like it just opens more doors to the government taking control of more things. And I mean, government waste is like this concept that everybody understands really well, yet we're like, oh, let's put the government in charge of like more things, right? So it's like you guys are counterintuitive to yourselves. Like, you just leave and listen to yourself and sit back and take these axiomatic truths, these logic, these things that we've arrived at through logic and reasoning, and actually apply them, and sit back and take a step back and realize what we're actually doing. And that's what the Austrian econ school teaches us to do, is look at what the effects of our actions are, and what the real effects of them are, and all the hidden things that we're not seeing, and actually try to see those too. And I think you had to do all that stuff in order to understand these perspectives that the libertarians philosophy puts forward. And I'll be honest with everybody, that I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. And I'm starting to become an obligate libertarian by being a Bitcoiner. So now I have to, try to rationalize and understand that, and use my logic and reasoning and critical thinking to really tear these things apart and see if that really does align with my current worldview, which is changing rapidly because I'm learning about Bitcoin, which is changing the world rapidly. And that's where I'm at right now. So happy to be here with you guys doing that.
I think it's about being intellectually honest, though, right? And I think this is what you're getting at, because this is the same for me. And I've still got really big questions outstanding that I'm hoping that we'll explore further on with this book club with different readings. We've started with the with like free market ideas about money, and it's like, man, like I feel like it's a really good base. I'm incredibly libertarian in terms of how I see money in markets now. In fact, like I actively try to challenge that viewpoint. I can't break through it yet. And I think what you're saying is that, there are these big questions that I think are sound questions about, the libertarian viewpoint where, and I don't have answers to these yet because I haven't dived into it enough, and I'm looking forward to challenging them. But it's like, what do you do about, law and order? Like, is that an emergent thing? Like, I don't know yet. I haven't done the right readings, but I'm curious about busting my assumptions. I'm ready to break them all down and see what we can build out from there. And maybe my viewpoint in the end doesn't end up being purely libertarian. Like, fuck knows. Like, I'll see where the evidence points. But you have to be open to breaking down those towers that you've built and seeing what's left.
Yeah, I hate this term, but everyone uses it, and it's so apt here. I mean, the red pill, right? I wish the Donald Trump campaign hadn't co-opted that term, because if he hadn't done that, I feel like it would have gone straight from the Matrix to this, and then it would be fine. But I hate using that term. But it really is like, once you really, as Zane's talking about, open yourself up to these ideas, and then like use all this logic and reasoning and deduction and critical thinking to really evaluate them and compare them against our default Keynesian worldviews or our default red versus blue worldviews, and really like actually analyze this stuff. You have to take a pill and go down that rabbit hole, and maybe you won't fall. Maybe you won't come out of it. That's what's happened to me with Bitcoin. Right, so that I've gone down this rabbit hole with Bitcoin, and I can't get out of it. I'm stuck here now. So I feel like we're just tumbling farther now with this libertarian stuff. So
is this why Vortex called himself that? Because it is kind of more like a vortex than a rabbit hole. Like I kind of feel like I disappeared into a black hole. I don't know. Like there's no way of getting back out of it. Like,
no, the gravitational pull is too strong. No, but I agree with all you said here. That was really good, and right, especially that the let's say the communist ideal, right? It sounds so compelling. Oh, we're just going to share everything, and we're going to live peaceful, right? And we're just going to help each other out. Right? That's awesome. That's really, really cool. And like that might be a desirable goal.
Dude, free stuff, dude.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Like, and that's because it's so enticing, right? Because it's such a, well, like a proverbial apple from the tree of evil, right? To be like, oh, that's actually really nice. I want to have this stuff, right? So that you then, as a human, might forego your rational logos in analyzing the situation as it actually is happening here and transpiring. And then if you are lulled into the sense of, oh, like they're going to take care of me, I'm going to get free stuff. That's awesome. I don't have to do anything. Right? Then you become passive and you become complacent and you forget your rights and your liberties. And then you are very vulnerable of completely getting those rights and liberties like trampled upon and being stolen from. And that's because it is such an enticing argument. I think many people fall for it. And especially, of course, with the huge mind control that is happening in the last couple, 100 years, like with government education, where they justify their slavery and their theft and be like, no, this is good. This is how it should be, right? We have democracy. We can vote for our slave masters. That's awesome, right? Then these are so complacent ideas. And because you're stuck in this loop and in this one rabbit hole, right, where your axiom is that it's okay to steal from others sometimes, right, as long as we do good stuff with that. And then you have this fundamental wrong axiom. And regardless what you do afterwards, you're going to end up in chaos, right? If you start from the wrong place and you keep on going in the wrong direction, you're not going to reach any desirable goal. And that then here, it's why it's so important to stay vigilant and to keep on rationalizing through our incredible ability of logos, to search for fundamental truths and then build from there. But this also means that we have to destroy old assumptions, right? And literally kill a part of ourselves that still clings on to these flawed ideas. But because it's such a huge construct, it's very non-trivial to break out of that. But then once you have found this new solid footing, then you can go spiraling down the next vortex and landing in the next rabbit hole. And you're not going to get out of that because it's so interesting. You have a new base point, and now everything that you go all of a sudden makes maybe a lot more sense, right? And that's why it's so powerful and why it grips you so much, I think.
It's kind of just like a rabbit hole full of other rabbit holes, and like I think it opens your mind, and like remarkably so. When I guess in the past week, like something that was pervasive even on Bitcoin Twitter was the whole Notre Dame fire and things like this. I had to do everything in my power to not dive down a rabbit hole about what sort of architecture lasts generations, and think about architecture through a time preference lens. Because like it just opens you to this level of curiosity where like these little things will trigger you to test weird assumptions that you still don't even realize that you're making. But it's very very much a hole that goes in one direction, and it's tough too. I think like I've got a lot of friends from years ago that like we probably don't have a lot of common ground anymore because the assumptions in the other rabbit hole, the Keynesian one, are so strong that you end up with very little common ground. I'll talk to friends who are asking some of the same questions as us, who look at all the problems in the world and who understand that finance is fucked, and they cannot get past their like belief in statism. And it seems like this really big, strong locked door over this rabbit hole where like you have to burst through that, and then this whole thing opens up ahead of you. It's fascinating. It makes it so difficult though. You have to, because that's a hell of a red pill to swallow.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because I don't think real libertarianism is possible with fiat money. But you're talking about all the friends that you're almost alienating, or maybe you haven't alienated them yet, but it's hard to have a conversation with them now because their position is just this. They're default Keynesians, they're default fiat money people, right? Because they've never seen anything else. And when you start talking about weird magic internet money, they're like, well, oh, that scam, that's going to zero. And it's like the conversation's over before it's even begun. And it's tough because what we've done is we've taken a lot of time and research to try to understand this enigma of a peer-to-peer protocol and all the implications that have fallen thereafter. But most people aren't really willing to do that, and they're comfortable in the things that they've accepted as, it takes a lot more effort to do what we're doing, and all this research and discussion and really trying to break down ideas and debate them back and forth a little. The three of us, we've been talking for many months, and we don't always agree exactly, and that I don't know where I'm going with this.
Follow Max's original vision.
TM. Trademark.
5 patents on it already. Suing you all. Well, yeah, right, absolutely. And maybe then jumping a bit back into the book, right, and keeping that a bit on track here. Chapter 2 is about property and exchange. And maybe what's really interesting on how we can get from these fundamental axioms, right, of non-aggression. Like, how do we get to property rights and exchange there? And I would say that a big part of it is scarcity, right? The attribute that there are some goods that can only be used for one task at a time. So, like for example, here this mouse, either Alice holds it or Bob. There's no way of both holding it at the same time, right? That's impossible. Thus, we need some form of resource allocation in order to circumvent that potential of conflict. And that rule of law, so to say, of natural law, because it is based on the fundamental axiom of scarcity, is property rights, right? To say whoever has homesteaded this, whoever has created something new out of the natural abundant resources around us, he has the property rights in that. right? And he can do with it whatever he pleases because he has built it with his own human ingenuity. And that's a powerful act that the individual did. And thus he gets to enjoy the fruits of whatever he has produced, right? If he builds a house, then he can go rest in it and be secure from the outside forces, right? But then also this means, right, if he has full control over it, that means that he can exchange it with others, right? And share his fruits of the labor and sacrifice what he has built in order to gain something else that Bob has built, right? Something that another person has sacrificed his time and attention and skill in order to build something. And if they both value the thing of the other person more, right? If they both have marginally more subjective value in this, then they will engage in mutually beneficial trade and get and help each other out, right? Again, like this idea of sharing and collaborating, but in a way that both parties benefit. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I find it interesting. Sorry, Ben, you go. I was about to take us off on a tangent. I think if you're going to answer more directly, then jump in.
I mean, I wanted to shill a podcast actually. I just recently listened to J.W. Weatherman on the Bitcoin echo chamber, and he specifically, like, the whole episode was about property, and it's right along these lines. So that's great because he really breaks it down, like Max is doing, where he's talking about actual things in our everyday lives and how, you know, I mean, I'm curious to hear. It's really interesting to me because, like, I think when you say these things about property, and like most people would be like, well, yeah, but I own my house. And it's like, yeah, you do. But like, that's because the government has allowed you zoning for residential in this place, and they haven't used eminent domain to take it away from you. And, also, like, you have a mortgage and you really don't own your house. The bank can take it away at any time. So it's like, your position of ownership over a lot of the things you own are based on permission. You're allowed to own those things, and who's giving you that permission? But I definitely recommend that podcast. It's right along these lines, and it's really gotten me primed for this discussion. I don't think I understand this stuff well enough to muse on this much farther than that. It's still mind blowing for me.
That was somewhat the tangent that I was going to go down, which is about land, because it fascinates me, and I wonder if the libertarian creed inherently sets you on a collision course with the state, because the way that I see land is that it's like it's the original rehypothecation, because there's more than one claim on the underlying asset, like. I either own my land or I don't. Like, and I would argue that in a nation state environment, you don't own your land because you can't declare sovereignty. And I think it's interesting in the context of this book because, again, in the sort of introductory history, it was talking about why the American Revolution resulted in more of a liberal outcome, at least initially, until it got subverted, more of a liberal outcome than, say, the French Revolution. And one of the strong arguments that it makes is basically that it was because, like, the US was a frontier land. Now, I feel like for the sake of this conversation, I have to caveat that obviously, there were native people in the US first, and I don't want to make light of that. History is full of travesties, but just at least thinking from the perspective that is pervasive in the way that we see things, there's an idea that the American Revolution was more successful because you could be sovereign over the land. There wasn't a nation state that had this pervasive control over it already. And so I wonder, if the libertarian sort of creed is to be successful in the long run, what does that leave us? Because we don't really have frontier lands. And like I say, I don't believe that we ever truly own land, at least not within a nation-state environment. So what's the way forward there?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I think I'm right along there with you, Zane, because I think there's some really interesting things to unpack, even in just what you just said, where A, we have this concept of a frontier where people are going and claiming a land and laying their stake on it. And then in a libertarian kind of world there, well, who's defending that land for them now? So let's say I claim, I go to the frontier, I find this place that looks like, nobody's there, and I build a house on it real quick. And then let's say I go travel back, somewhere else, and then I come back. What says somebody taken my land? And there's, in the current paradigm, obviously, like there would be a deed, and a government would enforce that somehow, and that wouldn't be there in the libertarian world. And then on top of that, you brought up the Native Americans, and you said you don't want to make light of it. I would like to, because we took all that land from them. So obviously, that isn't, that is invasion. So that wouldn't be a libertarian philosophy. But like, who decides? Who owns land at that point, and how can one own a piece of this earth anyway? And I mean, maybe we're kind of going even beyond the libertarianism at that point. It's very very tough for me.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you're exactly right to call me up on the Native American aspect. I think I was just trying to be consistent with the narrative that was weaved in the book for the purposes of the conversation. But I agree with you, and I think it's another inconsistency with the people that originally created these revolutions. So we saw the inconsistency with slavery, and I think you're exactly right. I think there's another inconsistency in their ideology with the people that were here first. But yeah, it's difficult. I suppose, like, I guess what I was saying is that that's kind of a different conversation in terms of this book.
Agreed. Yeah, I don't know if Max is willing to comment on the whole you go and you claim a land and maybe you build something on it, or maybe you don't, but then you go away for a minute. Well, can somebody take that land if like how if there's no central registry of who owns what? Well, then how do you defend it? Do you have to set up turrets, automatic drone turrets to like watch your land for you when you're gone in this anarcho-capitalist future that we're talking about possibly building? I don't know. That's what J. Weatherman talks about, right?
Yeah, like for one thing, for sure. Like if you can defend yourself, do it, right? And if you can defend your property, for sure. Like it's your responsibility to do that, and you have every right to do it. And if you don't do it, you're going to be trampled upon by many, many tyrants. But of course, I'm like this, like especially these economical and ethical arguments are they really depend on the very nuances of the case, right? That's why we need to have like a good justice system in order to find out what the truth actually was, because that's not trivial. And one person will never find the whole truth, right? That's why we need a good court system to enforce property rights. And so with abandonment first of all, with gaining something. So if you are on a lonely island, right, and no one is there, no one is using the land, then I would say, because it is completely abundant, there's a lot of it and no one is using it, right? Scarce resources that are just lying idle. And you then intermingle your human ingenuity and build something with that, say a cabin, right, a house, then you've done something with that, and you've increased the production stage of these natural resources. Thus, it's now your property, right? And then if you live in that house and someone kicks in the door and drags you out of it, then he is trespassing and stealing from you the house, right? So that would be wrong. But then, of course, what happens if you leave? Right? Let's say you go shopping and you're out for 5 hours, right? Well, no, sorry, I take that back. You're out for like 20 blocks. And then all of a sudden someone starts kicking in and be like, okay, no one is home, so I just own this now. Well, is this right? Well, no, of course not. Right? You were still using it. This was still something in active use of you. Yes, you abandoned it for a short time, but with every intention of coming back, and with coming back really soon. So someone doing that is, again, still home trespassing.
So what if you purchase 20 acres or something from somebody, and do you have to put up fences and signs that say the property of Ben? Please do not trespass.
Well, yeah, because how else are other people going to know that it's yours if you don't tell them? And the fence is pretty effective. And it's like, hey, like, this is mine. I own this, and please don't go any further.
Used right? Throughout history to denote land. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, why not? And many people have that, right?
Yes, and before anybody pushes back on Max sounding somewhat hypocritical here by saying, "Oh, you need a court system," if most libertarians are talking about small government. I mean, there is even the anarcho-capitalist idea of free market courts, right? so that like you don't even necessarily need a central authority to run courts. They could be free market courts, like a company that makes a court system that gains reputation, that you pay for this service to help mediate, disputes and stuff like that, which is, to me, it's mind blowing, these ideas, and trying to assimilate all these ideas together is, it's a head trip for sure.
Yep. And all we're saying with no state means no aggression, right? No stealing from each other. And can we find the truth without stealing from others? Oh, fucking course. Yeah. No, like, of course, right? But Ben, maybe, and saying before I kick it back to you, I just wanted to finish at one point on the abandonment, right? So if you're gone for a minute, right, of course it's still yours. But what if you're gone for 10 years, for 50 years, and the house is abandoned, looks like a mess, because if you don't keep things in order, then, well, they decay. And then, like, what are you going to do with that? If someone finds a ruin and he's like, okay, apparently no one has been using this for 10 years and no one is here, and I might as well just intermingle my human ingenuity again with that house and like fix it, right? Mow the law and like fix the door or whatever. And what then? And then he, I would say, has acquired a just property in that house, because he's again intermingled his human ingenuity. But of course, not with all of the house, right? So I would say in this case, he has, of course, the immediate right to use the house. But what happens if the original owner comes back and he can prove that this is his house and that he has intermingled his human ingenuity beforehand, right? Then I would say that the second person has to go out, right? But he can take everything with him that he has put there himself, right? So all the stuff that he's worked on, that he now owns, he can take that with him. Or of course they can do some interpersonal exchange, and like the old guy pays the young guy a couple pieces of gold or Bitcoin, right? And then he says, okay, thank you for fixing my house. Here's the money. May I have it back? Like with all the stuff that you have there. And I think that would work as well. So property only goes as far, I would say, as you actually use it actively. And if you abandon it for a long period of time, other people might pick it up again and use it and be productive with these resources.
Yeah, I mean, if I leave like a bike out on the street for like 2 years in the city, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be there anymore. And I'm pretty sure that at that point that the economic good is being appropriated to a better use. But I don't know. Somebody stole my bike.
That's why you have to defend it.
Yeah, right.
But Zane, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't even know where to begin. I mean, this is, man, that is a fascinating thought experiment. Because I guess like the examples that come into my head are not necessarily, a ruined house on some land, but thinking about, because I'm in New York, so like thinking about, I doxed myself, thinking about, when it was going through a bit of a rough patch not so long ago. And I think people are still doing this actually, and sort of, people hanging out and claiming places in abandoned buildings. And
there's laws, actually, squatting laws.
Squatters. Yeah,
but there's squatting laws. So there is precedent for this in our current paradigm, that if somebody squats and lives on a land for some period of time, then they do actually have a right to be there. And I think you can actually like gain ownership of it. I'd have to look this up, but look up squatting, because that's exactly what that is. There's laws that actually protect the people that do that if they do it for long enough on something that's been abandoned for long enough. So that's actually really interesting. I had forgotten about that for a second.
Because what, like, I guess to take it back to like a Bitcoin angle, I'm thinking about the incentives of this type of system. Like the idea that someone could move into something that's abandoned after like, I don't know, like 10 years, like when it becomes obviously abandoned, like I kind of like that. And I'm not even so sure about people then coming back after the 10 years. And I'm just like thinking out loud. So shoot me down by all means. But like, isn't the incentive that if you don't make use of the land, like someone else can, like a really good one? Doesn't it force people into, I kind of like it.
What if I'm a trillionaire and I have houses all across the world and I only use them, once every 20 years?
you got sound money, so don't store your value in houses.
Ooh. Wow, that was
Well,
such a great comeback. Holy
that
shit.
was very good. And I'm actually going to leave it on that. I'm going to quit while I'm behind on that one, guys, because I do have a lot of stuff to get done today. So I want to thank you guys. As always, you guys are awesome, always expanding me beyond my current paradigm of understanding. So
Awesome.
namaste.
What a great
Good job,
conversation.
man.
Namaste,
Good
my
chat
friend.
as always.
Thank you. Rock on, guys.
Bye.
See you, man.
Okay, but yeah, like really fucking awesome comeback, and just back to the point of the abandonment issue, right? What if the trillionaire has a bunch of houses? Well, if he rents them out and he's actively using that as a landlord, right, providing a service for others, which is of course the capital that he holds in these houses, that he has built up himself, right, or exchanged voluntarily for, and now he's voluntarily and mutually beneficially renting them out to their landlords who are more than willing to pay that money in order to live in those houses. So then he's actively using that,
Yeah.
right? So it's his. And on the other hand, right, even if he's a trillionaire and he wants to have 10 houses on like several continents, and he does not want to rent them out, but he only wants to go there like once a year, once every 10 years, can he still do that? Well, I mean, it's his property, right? So he can do that. But of course, he has to make it clear to others that he is still actively using this, right? And that again, meaning like he has to put a fence on there and a sign, and maybe have the landlord take care of it, like while he's gone, to make sure it's not in complete ruins when he returns. And of course, if it is his long-term property, then he's very much incentivized to keep everything smooth and everything running and valuable, right? And to not let everything decay. And the thing is, if he does let it decay, if he loses the capital and wealth, well, then he has to sell the houses eventually in order to get some money back to fix some of the other projects, right? So in the free market, if you're not vigilant, if you do not keep things in order, you go bust, right? And then someone else, someone more productive, has the property rights in these resources, but he has justly acquired them, right? So like the thing with abandonment only goes if you do not defend your property rights. If you do defend it, then I would say you can have them infinitely, even while being wasteful and burning them down.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly I think where my head was going as well. Is as you as the property owner carry the burden of defending that right, and it gets back to this idea about, I guess, like it was sort of said flippantly initially, but I think it's a sound one, about the idea that like everyone's going to have drones and all this sort of stuff. Like that's true, and I think a lot of the technology that we can use for defense has become relatively well distributed and commoditized. And it reminds me of that. I think we were talking about it briefly last week. That idea that why the US struggled in like Vietnam, for example, is that land defense has become so commoditized with the AK-47. A gun war doesn't really work anymore. It's not an advantage. You can't get an advantage in that context anymore. So this has been completely commoditized. The ability to defend your land is completely commoditized. And so if you don't exercise that right with these tools that are available to you, then like, I don't know, like maybe I'm being inconsistent, but my view on that is that like, well, like you could have. So like, what are you complaining about? It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. And if you're a trillionaire with 20 properties around the world, then like, fucking defend them. And if you don't want to, then like that's abandonment.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And as you say, as technology advances, as humans get better at stuff, and then we have better tools to defend ourselves. And that's awesome because, as you said, like with the AK-47, like the Vietnamese or or the Korean people, right, where the American tyrants just walked in and destroyed everything. What did they do? They didn't cower down and give up. They actually stood up and defended their property rights. And they did so in a guerrilla way, right? Decentralized, localized, because they knew the land and they had the heart to fight it. And then also they had the tools available, right? Mostly AK-47s and mines and stuff like that, because they were rather cheap to build and they had the tools available. And so now what we have today, where you can 3D print your own gun, and you can 3D print your own casing of the drone, right? And then you buy some consumer, like a Raspberry Pi Zero and a couple electric motors, and you build yourself your own like gun shooting drone for what, maybe, I don't know, $50 and a couple hours of your time, with the recipes to the 3D print available for free in the amazing cyberspace. I mean, we have that at our disposal already today. And just imagine how it will be 5 years, 10 years in the future. And then we have a very decentralized way of defending our property rights and doing it easily so in a censorship-resistant and private manner. And that is exactly how it should be, that the individual has the full capability to defend himself. And then we collaborate peacefully in order to make sure that we don't just go around killing each other.
Yeah. And I guess like this comes back to why the idea of having digital property now is so fascinating. It's such an interesting box to have opened up, and you know, obviously everyone's very familiar with the idea that digital scarcity was a hell of an innovation in Bitcoin. But it's interesting because, you know, we've had to resort to other forms of scarcity to not have our property rights violated, in terms of money. And, you know, this is why people have got 20 houses around the world and things like this. And, you know, I'm one of these people that are like more bullish on Bitcoin than even the most outrageous bulls are, because I see Bitcoin taking on a lot of the monetary value that other forms of property have accumulated. I mean, I'm a total art nerd. I follow the art market a lot. Before I discovered Bitcoin, I like invested heavily in art. Like that was kind of one of the ways that I was storing my value. And, you know, you see these paintings that are like starting to like, well, I mean, a lot of them are getting into the hundreds of millions and things like this. And once you get to Bitcoin, you're like, oh man, this market's in for a rude awakening, because like, you know, there are billionaires all around the world that are exercising property rights in art because they can't exercise property rights in money. And it's such a fascinating Pandora's box. So everyone that's talking about like this bullish case for Bitcoin one day being $1 to $10 million, like, I know it sounds fucking outrageous, and I'm willing to own that, but I think it can go higher, because there's value all over all these other asset classes that simply exist because property rights have been violated so consistently.
Yeah, exactly, right. And if we have communism, right, or if we have socialism, or just people are stealing from each other all the time, then of course we're gonna like do some stupid stuff that we probably should not have done. And especially when this theft is based on inflation, because like a monetary asset is so unspeakably important to the individual, to remove uneasiness of the future, right? To have something today that you know tomorrow you can buy anything that you want with it. Right? That removes so much uncertainty. When you have the most liquid medium of exchange at your hands, that you know at any point in time in the future, you can get everything that you need with that. And you know that that no one can take it away from you, either physically, right? That was the main disadvantage of gold, right? That physical possession of gold was really risky, but then also via inflation, right? Via debasement of the base money supply. And here, with both of these regards, Bitcoin is beautiful because it really helps you to defend your property rights in a rare and a sound monetary asset. And then this means that you no longer have to evade into something else to store your value, such as houses, companies, right, art, or all the other things that we have now malinvestments in. There is a use case for these things, right? And we live in a house because, well, we like having a roof over our heads, right? But then there is an additional monetary value, individual subjective value, where it is like, I want to store my value. And all of a sudden people speak of houses as like a investment, right? That will yield dividends in the future, but it's not. It's a huge cost point, right? But you still store your value in it, and thus it has this additional monetary benefit. And as soon as we realize this and we say like, okay, Bitcoin is a better sound money, it's a better way to postpone our consumption into the uncertain future and save and sacrifice something, then all this monetary value will go poof and zero. And this means that, of course, a huge crash in these markets, which is healthy, right? Because the capital is getting reallocated into something more productive, something like Bitcoin that can actually be useful as a sound currency and sound money for the world.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like getting back to that property thing. And I guess I'm conscious that probably for a lot of people, the idea that you can just like take property that's been abandoned might seem jarring. I'm conscious that we're like quite far down this rabbit hole in terms of what informs our views on this, but you know, defending like land is expensive, and maintaining land is expensive, and that's a good thing. Like, you know, you have to. I think, you know, even if the idea that you can take over an abandoned property sounds jarring, I think you have to think about like how those incentive structures work. Like, it doesn't make sense that we socialize the cost of defending land. You know, like it might sound like a stickler point, but it's an important one. That if you know, if you have land in 20 different countries and you exercise your property rights through the courts and through the police force, the people paying taxes in those countries are the people that are paying to defend your land. And that's kind of fucked, to be honest. And I know it sounds like a stickler point, but these things compound. And when you look at this on a aggregate level, where all of this has been added up over time and across different countries, it's actually quite substantial. So I actually don't think it's particularly inconsistent. And if the incentive structure of Bitcoin is that people store value in this commodity that doesn't, you know, require like defending control over like physical resources, then that's probably a really cool outcome. Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know where I'm going with that. Just brainstorming out loud.
No, but that's very good, right? And it's good to clarify these thoughts, and that helps you realize the immense potential of Bitcoin, right? Because it is power to the individual and the ability to save yourself from thugs stealing from you, and this is a very important thing. And with Bitcoin, we make it easy, and we make it social scalability, right? We can now, with a network of nodes, right, validating everything on the network, then we can all of a sudden make sure that no one is stealing from anyone. That is the double spend, right? That is, double spending is a break in the scarcity of Bitcoin. It means that you can use the same coin for several things at the same time, right? And you can get with the same coin your coffee, and with the same coin your house, right? But that is not how it works, right? That is not how money can function. But that is how money is functioning right now in the economy, with fractional reserve and inflation and debt-based money, right? But with Bitcoin, we now have a way of defending ourselves in the court of public opinion on the network of peers of the Bitcoin full nodes, right? And maybe to pull that back a little bit to the history, right? A huge innovation here of the American like legacy, so to say, is of course like the judicial system, right? That actually was rather good for the times to defend your property rights, to be judged in front of your local peers, right? And 12 of them, right? And to have fair courts, and to have the way to defend yourself, and to have a lawyer, and to not and to have like the burden of proof being on the accuser and not on the accused, right? These are immense genius ideas, and they helped a lot to form somewhat of a sound society. But we see now, a couple hundred years later, it completely blew up, now being the biggest tyrant of them all. So we need to try something else. And maybe Bitcoin and the network of nodes forming the time chain is one of these approaches, right?
Yeah, and I think the fact that property rights are expensive to enforce is a great like equalizing measure as well. You know, a substantial part of the cultural zeitgeist at the moment is concerned with inequality. And I think one of the social attacks that we should certainly expect in Bitcoin, when it's sort of successful and more mainstream, maybe in 10 years' time, is I think people are going to turn around and point at some of the big bag holders who got in really early and sort of try to make a case that it's not fair. And I think, at least within our lifetimes, we're going to see some levels of wealth that like the world's never seen before. I think some of the early Bitcoin holders, if they got particularly heavy bags, like on paper, they're going to be worth like fortunes that are almost inconceivable. And people are going to have a problem with that. But it's really expensive to action your property rights. It's really expensive, and it's incredibly inefficient. I wouldn't want to be the person that has to make good use of trillions of dollars as the sole person responsible for that. You know, this is not something that can last long without resorting to coercive forces, because there's going to be inefficiencies in that. you can either sort of sit on like your savings in Bitcoin and keep them off to one side and not use them, or you can try to use them all and inherently be inefficient about it, no matter how hard you work. And over time, people are going to exploit the gaps that you miss. People are going to compete on the small things that you just can't possibly, because some of the big Bitcoin bag holders are ultimately going to have the wealth of a nation at some point. I fully expect this. And I just don't think it's a problem, because property rights are so freaking expensive to exercise. And that's good. That's the nature of things. It doesn't, I don't know. I feel like you're going to push back. So this is exciting. Again, I'm just brainstorming points, but I wouldn't want to be the person that has to exercise $1 trillion worth of wealth, because you're going to lose that over time. People are going to exploit the gaps that you miss.
Very interesting. And I mean, like, yes and no, I get your point, and it's really interesting. And I think you're right on an overview level, but I would say that it's also really important to realize that it's not just defending your property rights, it's allocating your property rights in these scarce resources efficiently, right? And to not do malinvestments and to not overconsume. And that is pretty damn difficult, because, and that's the same argument Mises provides in Socialism, right? That if you, that great book, by the way, really must read. And that he provides here the beautiful explanation that if you have a lot of resources and you do not, and all of them belong to the same property rights owner, that one individual who has ultimate control over these resources, then there is no longer a voluntary and mutual beneficial exchange within this economy, right? Within this micro economy. And because there is no longer mutual beneficial exchange and trade, there are no longer prices being discovered. And because we don't have prices, we can no longer allocate these resources, right? But if we have the large economy with all sovereign individuals acting, then everyone has bits and pieces of knowledge, right? And everyone can, through his own individual actions, make sure that the resources are allocated efficiently. And so if the miner in South Africa mines copper, for example, and then all of a sudden his mine explodes, right? Then the supply of copper is going to be reduced because that entrepreneur can no longer provide it. And thus the price of it will increase. And then the construction company in America, they do not need to know that the resource or that the mine in South Africa exploded and that it will no longer produce, because they know that, oh, the price got more expensive, so we need to be more careful with what we do with this. We need to allocate it more sparsely, with more care, right? And you do not have that in a large microeconomy. Right? And that's why it's so difficult to manage a state, right? Because there is no mutual beneficial trade within the state. And then it's also difficult to manage a huge company, right? If you have hundreds of thousands of employees, well, like, how the hell are you going to do that? It's almost impossible. And I would say this, even like if you have more than 50 people working on a project, it's going to get pretty damn difficult. And if it's over 150, like, you're done. Like, no chance. You're gonna be very unproductive. And I would say that it's difficult to be profitable on a large scale. But I also do see your points on the property rights. So what would be your rebuttal?
No, I agree with you completely. I think my brain was moving faster than I could talk, and so I probably didn't explain it properly. But that's kind of what I meant, is in terms of like exercising property rights. I didn't just mean sort of defending property. I meant actually making productive use of it is going to be incredibly fucking difficult. And I think we could see that apparent inequality that will emerge out of the early Bitcoin standards disappearing pretty quickly. Either that, or you just can't make good use of that capital, in which case it's a moot point. Like, who gives a shit? Like, if you've got $1 trillion in wealth, but you can only exercise 1 million of them, then like, I don't care. You just made my Bitcoin more valuable because you're not using the stash that is left the circulating supply. Fantastic. Win-win.
Yeah, exactly, right? And however, though, I would agree on what you said, and I think it's really powerful, is that if we have a better way that the individual can defend his property rights, and I'm literally speaking about defending now, so stopping someone attempting to steal those goods and services, right? if we have here, because currently, right, it's difficult to do that. And thus, if you have more wealth, it's easier to do that because you have more, let's say, liquid capital that you can allocate to your defense. Right? Yes, it's going to get more difficult to defend a huge estate of wealth, of course, but you have more resources to do that. And therefore, it might be, although it's marginally more expensive, overall, the expense will be like doable for you with your total wealth, maybe. But then the cool thing is, with technologies of all kinds, we can decrease that gap, that differential. Because, so for example, if only the king can afford to have full plate armor, right, and anyone else is running around with leather armor, right, then the king can defend himself much better than the peasants, right, and thus the king will rule over them because they have no chance of defending their property rights from the king. But what happens if all of a sudden everyone starts wearing mail and plate, right? Then the king all of a sudden is no longer so special, right? And that differential has decreased because now the tools of defending your property rights have reached everyone. And I think we can do that with Bitcoin, because with Bitcoin, you can run your full node on an old laptop, right? And that means you have full control, full defense of your property rights. And if you can invest, I don't know, let's say $400 for a novel, $100 for a cold card, like that's it, $500, and you have unbreakable security pretty much, right? And because now that is much more accessible to everyone, to the peasant, so to say, right, to the layman, to the average Joe, potentially even on your phone, right? Then we have this way where we have decreased the differential of the ability to defend your property rights. And that will mean that the individual can be more prosperous and defend that extra wealth, which means everyone will be more prosperous, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I think what I'm talking about is a time preference thing as well. Maybe this inequality that will, I keep using that word because I feel like I can trigger people with it. Maybe that will, look bad initially, but it's just a time preference thing. Like these things become commoditized, in particular. This is why I've still got this really strong belief that people have underestimated the internet, is because of just how much it frees information. And if there's information about how to defend yourself well, and you as a wealthy patron can sponsor that information for your own purposes, and you get it and you use it, and you exercise that knowledge differential to defend your rights better than others can, it's only a matter of time before that sort of becomes commoditized. It's just information. And we see this, I think you mentioned like 3D printed guns as well. It's like, like weapons are information. It's fucking fascinating. It's completely, I think we're only seeing the start of it. But I do find, I don't know, I guess this is the question that everyone asks, but I'd be interested in your viewpoint on it, which is that I see us Bitcoiners as inherently being on a collision course with the nation state. And I think, we're doing it very well at the moment. It is a non-violent revolution. It's a beautiful revolution. But do you think that it's on a collision course that might become violent at some point? Or is this something that, that knowledge differential in terms of defense just slowly seeps out through the new channels that are available to us to the point that it's a stalemate by default?
Yeah, very, very good question. And of course, I don't know the answer. But I would say that if a tyrant or a bully has the power to take anything he wants from anyone, right, he will do it, of course. That's why he's the bully. That's why he's the tyrant. And if all of a sudden, like the small guy starts defending himself, then the bully will get angry, right? And he will put more pressure on that small guy, still hoping that he can break him. And then hoping that others are going to fear to stand up. And the thing is, again, with technology, all the small guys can start defending themselves better. And all of a sudden, the one bully against 100 small guys with good weapons of self-defense, he has no chance. So sooner or later, even though he might try to aggress against others, and that has happened. Look at Ross Ulbricht, right? Look at Julian Assange. These are heroes of liberty being caged and tortured by these thugs, these immoral pigs, right? It's insane. Like, this is a war. It has started. It has started a long time ago. And give me liberty or give me death, right? We are going to reclaim our sovereignty, and we will do it. And even if many of us will perish at that everlasting fight towards sovereignty, it's not going to end. Tyrants are always going to exist. Psychopaths who want to steal from you will never back off. The question then is, though, how can they try to overcome such a movement? And I would say it's with the age-old tactics of divide and conquer. Try to misinform people and spread lies and falsehood. Blockchain, right? And all these buzzwords, that's the biggest attack on Bitcoin. It is. Like, so many people are interested in blockchain. Who cares about Bitcoin? Like, it's a very, very minority. And that is, I think, the war that we have to fight. Yes, it's also a physical war, for sure. But first and foremost, it's a war of the mind and of ideas. And that is why something like the World Crypto Network or here the reading group was so damn important. Because if we don't speak the truth, and if we only accumulate false information, then our actions are going to lead into tyranny and chaos all the time. But if we have sound and truthful information at our disposal to accumulate and to eventually understand, then we can act upon what we know to be right. And then we will defend ourselves from the most evil of things, because evil cannot stand a chance against love and truth. And that is what we have at our side, and that is very powerful.
Everything that you've been saying is making me think of the Mueller report, because and to sort of tie it back to the book, and you know, the once state and church were separated, you know, the state still had to control information and control people's like perceived need of these overlords. And you know, I think I don't know. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, which is so hard with these discussions. But basically, you know, the Mueller report, without alluding to any sort of conspiracy, it's hard to separate the 2-year campaign that went on about trying to make the present threat of a national enemy in Russia so pervasive. I cannot separate that effort from, you know, information warfare. And I would argue that the US is engaging in information warfare against its own people already, because, you know, I hate to say it, if there's some like sort of Democrats out there like who have got some sort of like never Trump take on the world. You know, I'd never go so far as to say that Trump's any sort of good leader, but at the end of the day, you had a 2-year information campaign that did everything in its power to rally a nation against another nation, by painting a picture of something that it turns out just didn't fucking happen. And I think this is interesting in the context of what we're talking about, because, yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's about power over ideas. And this is, again, the idea that people have underestimated the internet. I think that the establishment has lost control of information, and it's going to get messier and messier. The shit that we're gonna see is going to be the Mueller report on fucking steroids in the coming decade, I think. And we already see it. Ross Ulbricht, like, you know, for sure, you know, there was a legal case to be made, and I don't agree with the outcome, but there was a legal case to be made against him. Like, he did create a market on which, you know, illegal activity was happening and all that sort of bullshit. But the information warfare side of it was pinging him with false murder for hire charges, which the judge alluded to in their sentencing of him without ever trying him for it. That's information warfare. That is war with your constituents. I don't know if I'm being too extreme here, but it seems striking to me.
No, very, very astute points, and I would absolutely agree. And you know, the thing is, how do you push such a large society into submission, and how do you make them so sheeple that they will tolerate you stealing 95% of all their productive wealth? It's like, these are serfs, right? Living on the property of the master, eating from the master's bread, and working as much as they can for the master, but only keeping the most little of their fruits of labors. These are serfs. And the fiat system and taxation system is the most brutal form of that. And so the thing is, how do you get to such a point? And I would say it's in part also like the Hegelian dialectic, right? You have a thesis, you want to accomplish something, slavery, where you are the master, right? Then you build a antithesis, right, where you are like, oh, look over there, there's an evil guy. Oh, there's a terrorist. He wants to blow everything up, right? And then you provide a solution. And you're like, oh, look, hey, I can defend you against that evil guy, right? And I will keep him off, and I will fight them, right? And I will kill them, and I will go to Syria and go to Iraq and go to Vietnam and Viet Cong, and I will kill the enemy, right? But I mean, right, that comes at a cost. Yeah, I just have to tax you a little bit. I have to steal from you a little bit, right? Oh no, you can't have any guns. No, I need them, right? I need to fight the terrorist. Wait, you want to have guns? You're the terrorist, right? That is the Hegelian dialectic. Thesis, what you want to accomplish, antithesis, a problem, and then a solution, which leads from the problem to the thesis, to the solution that you had in mind all along. And I think that's what we see with so many of these things, right? And again, that's why it's so important to have a rational logos and to be able to discover what is actually true and to see through these falsehoods and to be like, no, like you can't just go into other countries and steal from them and kill them. And no, like I have the right to defend myself, and you will not get the wealth that I've produced on my own as a free human being. And these are very difficult things to break out of, right? If you are caught in this in this negative vortex of aggression and theft.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to the idea of consistency and how it's important. And obviously, I was talking about how the very early Democratic Party had a fatal flaw in its inconsistency with slavery. I think there are some inconsistencies in Bitcoin as well, where people will be very strongly liberal in their views. Sorry, I shouldn't. Yeah. Liberal in the sense that liberal actually means, not the cultural baggage that it's accumulated. People will be very liberal, social libertarian in their views until they get to something that challenges their like Americanism or something like this, and it's fascinating to watch. And I think it's a fatally flawed blind spot that a lot of Bitcoiners have. So we'll have all these interesting discussions about freedom until you get to, say, Julian Assange, and then all of a sudden he's a Russian agent and a great threat to the America that you believe in. And I would argue that this is incredibly inconsistent. There's this very strong mythology in America. I love what America is supposed to represent. The American Revolution was a profound thing. And this is something that Rothbard points out, and I'd be interested in seeing how it could possibly evolve. But Rothbard points out that America is probably one of the places in the world with the best chance of getting back to a libertarian existence because of this rich history of that philosophy. But what you see today is this inconsistency where, it's this idea of freedom has been subverted, and freedom is associated with fighting for your country, and freedom is associated with, like Assange is like anti-American because he's a Russian agent. I think people have been blinded to what a nation state can actually represent and just how debilitating it is towards those ideals that you hold so high.
Yeah, exactly, right? And here I can only recommend a great book series. Rothbard was a great historian, first and foremost, and his Conceived in Liberty. So far, 3 volumes are out and are published, and you can get them on Mises.org. And they just found the manuscripts of 2 more volumes, and they will be published very soon. The Mises Institute is actually fundraising here and looking for donors to help with the publishing. And I mean, Rothbard was just writing so much; it's insane. But his Conceived in Liberty is very good, and it means here that, right, there has always been, and there will always be the truth of freedom and liberty, right? A fundamental axiom that is inherent in the universe, natural law, not man-made, and it's been here before man, and it will be here after man. And the thing is that humans will discover it and rediscover it and forget it. And rediscover it, and again forget it, many, many times over. And the thing, though, is that nature always prevails, right? Truth always prevails. And so if humans start messing up and start living in accordance with what is wrong, right, then you can no longer, then it will always end in tyranny and in chaos. And nature does not tolerate chaos, right? It will bounce back and swing back into peace and into prosperity. And the thing is, how will we engage that swing back? Well, we as a human race, as a conscious entity here, get to a level where we realize that stealing from others is wrong. And then we can ourselves walk back and be more prosperous. Or will we continue to wage war and to kill each other until eventually, as probably many societies for us have done as well, we will all die of horrible deaths because we cannot handle nuclear weapons, or we get a massive plague because of too much centralization in cities, or some other things, right? And stuff like this will happen. Nature always prevails. But what will we do? And will we knowingly, despite nature, and try to do what is impossible to achieve? Or will we try to live in accordance with universal laws of nature, like gravity, but then with the understanding and the grasp of gravity, reach unlimited heights and achieve flight and leave our space rock, right, with rockets? This is all possible only because we work in accordance with natural law and with the things that are all around us, and not despite them.
That's so good. Yeah, I wonder the direction that just shot my mind off in is the fetishization of AI. You know, there seems to be this construct at the moment that, you know, if we can just get AI to rule the world, then, you know, we can fix all these problems. Like, yes, there's these knowledge differentials and we're not controlling the world too well yet, but once we've got a good AI, we will. You know, it'll tell us everything. I wonder. I think that could be, again, like fatally flawed. I am skeptical that even the most powerful algorithms can adequately, you know, calculate and predict the outcomes of 7 billion plus people, and that's human action. I don't think you can do it. I think it's too complex. But, you know, we'll see. There's this, yeah, it's heavily fetishized. I think it's antithetical. I think there's like these two directions that technology is going on at the moment. And I think it shouldn't be surprising that large actors, like the huge corporates, are so obsessed with AI. I think there's an intuitive realization that central control over a huge mass of people and economic activity just isn't feasible. I think even the likes of, you know, relatively new megaliths like Google, I think they know that they can't do things as well as they might have liked to. I think this is why you see slippage in their ideals. You know, you have to resort to control in order to adequately predict. Again, one of these tangents that I don't really know where I'm going with it, but it's just sort of what you made me think about just then.
Yeah, great points. And I mean, this is something that Mises wrote a lot about, and Hayek as well. And well, Hayek's focus here was on information, right? One entity cannot have enough information, and one human can not possibly know what other humans are thinking, right? And that, because always value, and that now goes more into on Hayek's point of not having enough information in general, right? Market information, a artificial intelligence with big data, whatever these buzzwords means, right? If and then, or if else conditions, basically, then you might have enough, and with enough computer power, right? You might be able to fast enough process information. But that's not the entire side of the argument. And Mises is much more precise here on what I think is more important than just the lack of information. It's that if, well, one human cannot guess or estimate the desires of another, right? Those are subjective values, and you cannot know them from outside. And this means that we need to have a way to prove the marginal values, and we do that with action. Every time you act, you prove that this act was the most delightful thing, the most productive thing you could have possibly done. And if not, then you would have done something else, right? And this way, with action and free action, voluntary action, we realize what we actually want to have and what we actually most deeply desire. And then also, only with individual action, we can have property rights being traded, and only then can we have prices for goods and services. And only with free exchange do we then know how to allocate these resources. And if we have coercion and non-voluntary exchange, then we will not have true prices that represent the actual rarity and importance of non-abundant goods, like so many that we have around us. And these are very tricky things that, as you say, no computer can any solve.
Yeah, and this sort of blind belief that, you know, in science, and obviously science is important, but this blind belief in science and the fact that we can solve these problems is, I think, one of the main fallacies that sets us up for sort of like, you know, the system where we have trusted people to manage economies and things like this. You know, we've created this fetish that science can fix everything, and it's most profound in economics because, of course, it's just, you know, the combination of human action, and that has been the most clear fallacy of them all. But, you know, it's pervasive. You know, before getting into the Austrian school, you know, I explored some other economists' thoughts. One of them is a guy called Professor Steve Keen. He sort of, I was really interested in him for a while, and he's really obsessed with debt, and the teachings of I think Minsky, something like that, and basically he's fallen into what I perceive as a trap, where he's now trying to come up with economic models with this, like, that will predict like the next crisis and stuff, with this key insight that he's found that, you know, debt predicts economic crises. And it's like, yeah, sure, like debt definitely correlates to a lot of economic crises, but the debt represents malinvestment. The debt represents creating a whole shit ton of money based on this illusion that we can fix all these problems by just softening it, and, you know, of course, exposing ourselves to black swan events by pretending that chaos doesn't exist. And so, yeah, for sure, but you're a layer too high. Like, you're looking at the debt's a symptom of underlying structures where people are trying to manage these economies. And I don't think you're ever going to come up with models that are going to, you know, it's a fallacy. We've fetishized science too far. Science is so fucking powerful, but you can't see it as God. Yeah, it's interesting. And I feel like that just compounds, and it puts us in a position to put too much faith in these overarching entities, in these nations, in these experts that are running the show for us, because we think that science fixes it all. And if these experts could just do it right, then, you know, utopia on Earth. And it's a fallacy.
Yep, absolutely. And again, we have to be really careful here with what we wish for, right? And what we optimize for. What is the thing that we strive to reach, that we might never reach, right? Because things are not perfect. But if we have something like equality of outcome as the fundamental goal that we strive for, that everyone is the same, well, how are you going to ever accomplish that? Right, and you will need to eventually, like, start stealing from others and give it to someone else, so that the wealthy person will become less wealthy and the poor person will become more rich, right? But again, like, you could do that, but is that desirable as the base axiom, as the thing that you align your actions with? Or is it something like freedom, full well knowing that, yeah, it's not perfect, for sure not, and some people will get rich and some people will get poor. But again, what do we want to optimize for? And do we want to have a world where we can steal from the poor and push him down and keep him at this low state? Or do we want to have a way where everyone has the opportunity to achieve greatness and to be productive and to do something delightful, regardless of how rich or how poor he is, right? Always having the opportunity to defending our property rights and to engaging in voluntary action. And that is, in that sense, again, really important here to differentiate. And again, it's not that it will be perfect. It's not that it will be pretty. It's not that it will be easy. But if it would be trivial, then, well, we would be in heaven right now, right? But of course we are not, right? We still live here in an imperfect world where we live with uncertainty, where we do not know what the future holds for us. And because humans always have a imperfect vision of the truth and well, not enough information available in order to do the best thing that you can, or that you could possibly achieve, right? You can never be perfect. That is impossible. But on the other hand, like what are we going to do then? Even though knowingly that we are not perfect, right? That we can make mistakes, and that is the entrepreneurial act, right? To act in uncertainty, to allocate resources without knowing what the future might bring, but still doing the best that you can, and still thriving to be brave and vigilant in your action.
I must confess to have missed most of that. My my computer just went into this frenzy, and suddenly I was signed out of all my Google accounts and stuff like that. Maybe there was a bit too much thought crime going on here, but I got the gist of it, and yeah, I agree completely. I actually need to go soon, so perhaps it might be good to wrap this up.
Yes, for sure. Okay. So we've talked pretty much about part one right here. So the introduction with a libertarian heritage a little bit, about property and exchange. Oh wait, I actually should share screen if I show something on the screen. And then a little bit about the state and aggression and where that might lead us. But Piers, as you might have noticed, we're not really going to focus too much on the on the exact structure of the book. We just go into ramblings all over the place. But the cool thing is that we really have all read this book now before here, and we talk about the ideas more than we talk about the precise content. So yeah, just to say here, good that you start reading this alongside with us, and to make sure that you read and accumulate this very powerful knowledge and judge it for yourself, whether or not this is the truth or not. Don't trust, verify, right? And it's just us two here, or three, spitballing, and that is very good that way. So yeah, Zane, any last words?
Not really. I'm excited to open this can of worms. I feel like we've read a lot of economics heavy books already, and it's pretty exciting to dive into more of the holistic political even stance of the likes of Rothbard. I think it's easy to forget that he had a very wide ranging view on the world, communicated a lot of it very well, and he was brave enough to actually put it all together and put it all together consistently. I think there's a tendency for a lot of people with libertarian views to make exceptions for whatever is the pervasive issue of the time and make allowances for that. And Rothbard, I find, is always incredibly consistent. In fact, so bullish that it possibly in his lifetime made it more difficult to access some of these thoughts. But in the long run, I think we see the result of his low time preference and his adherence to to not taking any prisoners, to always being consistent in those viewpoints. And so yeah, I'm really excited to start with this book and dive into some more of the philosophical realm of these questions. I think at a certain point, you develop a sound understanding of the economic case that lies around Bitcoin and lies around the natural economy. And yeah, to me, the next challenge is to start blowing down, looking at things like, law and order and all that sort of stuff. And, I've got an intuitive sense of where that might go. But it's exciting to blow that down and use this manifesto of his as the door to open into all of those thoughts.
Yes, exactly. Right. It's a nice way to have these ideas condensed by someone who's a very skilled writer and someone who has great ideas worth listening to. But as always, right, don't trust, verify, and accumulate a vast eclectic array of sources. And again, judge it on your own for its merit, and if this is actually the case. And if you don't do that, then you will have great problems. And this is what this book club is about, right? To read this book, but not be in a bubble, right? But actually have the interaction with other peers who've accumulated the same information, right? And who are then together trying to discover the truth. And these conversations, as we now have them for months, have been so amazing because it always keeps my head going and challenges me with new input from you peers. And that is very, very awesome. So again, this is an open discussion forum. So jump into the Slack at thebitcoinreadinggroup.com and join the conversation for next week. Read a bit of that book and judge for yourself on how you want to approach this in discussion. So as always, Piers, thank you very much for joining me today, or well, us today, and see you on the next show. Bye bye.
See you guys.